Breaking from Los Angeles tonight, gas stations across the city are now charging $8.21 per gallon. Not a misprint, not a glitch on the sign, $8.21. People are pulling up, getting out of their cars and taking pictures because they genuinely do not believe what they are seeing. That is where we are right now, and if you think that number is the ceiling, you have not been paying attention, because every data point, every expert and every system currently in motion is pointing to one place, $10 a gallon, coming fast. Let's start with what is actually happening on the ground. Right now in Los Angeles, $8 a gallon is not the exception. It is the reality at station after station. People are filming it. Social media is flooded with it. $8, $8.21. And somewhere in California, $10 a gallon is already on a sign. Think about what that number means for a real person living a real life. The average American drives roughly 37 miles a day. That adds up to about 13,500 miles over the course of a full year. At $8 a gallon, you are looking at approximately $3,600 spent on fuel alone, and that is not touching your insurance, your car payments, or a single repair. That is just the act of filling up. That is just getting to work, getting to the grocery store, getting your kids to school. And that number assumes prices stop at 8. They are not stopping at 8. But here is where the system starts to crack. Because this is not just about California. This is not a regional quirk or a state tax anomaly. Big cities across the United States are already facing more than $8 a gallon. And the national average, the number that represents everywhere, including the South, the Midwest, rural Tennessee, suburban Ohio, has crossed $4. Portland, Oregon. There is nowhere in the entire city where you can find gas under $5. Nowhere. Here is the part that most people are missing. This is not just about oil. This is about ships. Thousands of tankers and cargo vessels are currently bottled up in the Persian Gulf, unable to move. At least 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas passes through the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil moves through that same corridor. And right now, that corridor is compromised, with only 6 to 7 ships being allowed to pass through at any given time. One of the world's leading supply chain experts, Nick Vias from USC, has laid this out in brutal terms. When those ships cannot meet their deadlines, when they cannot take on new cargo, when thousands of vessels sit idle, the entire global supply chain seizes up. It does not just slow down, it seizes. And here is the part that should terrify you. Even if the conflict stopped today, completely, immediately, right now, that backlog would take 6 months, possibly a full year, to unwind. 6 months to a year of continued disruption, continued shortages, continued price escalation. The damage is already locked in. The timer has already started. And this expert is not hedging. He says demand remains high, supply is falling, and prices rising is not a possibility. It is inevitable. He is forecasting a 40 basis point reduction in global GDP. That is not a slowdown. That is a recession. He is calling this moment every bit as dangerous to the world economy as COVID-19. Possibly more dangerous, if this lasts longer. He says we have not seen this kind of disruption from a conflict in many, many decades, possibly going all the way back to World War II. But this is where the system actually snaps, because while all of this is unfolding overseas, there is a quiet catastrophe happening right here at home, and almost nobody is talking about it loudly enough. The United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the emergency buffer that is supposed to protect American consumers from exactly this kind of global shock, entered this crisis already at half capacity. When the conflict began, the reserves were only 50% full, not a full tank, half a tank. And since then, approximately 30% of what remained has already been released into the market in an attempt to hold prices down. Do the math. We started half empty. We released 30% of what we had. And our oil reserves are now on track to run out by the end of April. End of April. That is not months away. That is weeks. And when those reserves hit empty, the last buffer between American consumers and the full, unfiltered force of the global oil market disappears completely. When that happens, the consensus among those watching this closely is clear: $10 a gallon at the pump, nationwide. Here is something that needs to be understood, because a lot of people are confused about why prices here are surging when the United States actually produces more oil than it consumes. The US is largely energy independent in terms of raw production, so why are Americans paying $8 at the pump? The answer is the global market. Oil is not priced locally, it is priced worldwide. When a conflict disrupts a major supply corridor like the Strait of Hormuz, where roughly 20% of the world's oil passes, countries across Europe, Asia, and Africa begin to panic about shortages. That fear alone drives prices up globally. And when major economies like China and India face supply disruptions, demand shifts and prices rise across every market on Earth, including ours. It does not matter that we drill our own oil. We are chained to a global pricing system, and that system is currently in freefall. And what is the official response to all of this? What is the plan from the top? The government's current strategy to lower prices for consumers is to raise the ethanol content in gasoline from 10% to 15%. That is the plan. That is it. Let's be honest about what this actually does. Yes, the number on the sign at the gas station will tick down, marginally, slightly, enough to make a headline. But what it will not do is lower your actual costs. Here is why. Ethanol burns faster than gasoline. A tank that normally takes you 300 miles will not take you 300 miles anymore. You will be filling up more often, and during the hot months, a portion of that ethanol simply evaporates before you ever burn it. You lose fuel without ever moving an inch. So you are paying less per gallon for fuel that gets you fewer miles per tank. The cost, when you do the full calculation, does not go down. It goes sideways or worse. And that is before you factor in what higher ethanol content does to air quality. Cities that switch to a higher ethanol blend will see more smog, more pollution, more lung issues, more breathing problems. That 5% difference in ethanol content is not a footnote. It is a real environmental and public health consequence being handed down to communities that are already struggling. Within 3 weeks of implementing this, prices will likely be right back to where they were before, except now the gas is less efficient, dirtier, and the structural problem has not moved an inch. This is what it looks like when a system tries to buy a few days of calm instead of solving anything real. Stop thinking about this as an abstract economic story. Look at what is already happening to actual people. A woman in Tennessee, not California, not New York, Tennessee, is standing at a Kroger gas station staring at $3.69 a gallon and saying she has never seen anything like it in 15 years of driving. She is already talking about riding an electric scooter. A man in an unspecified city just paid $75 to fill a truck that used to cost him $42 or $43. A woman who fills up twice a week is now spending $100 on gas alone, and she is doing the math out loud. That's $40 extra a week she didn't used to spend, and the result is she can't drive to the lake, can't make it to her workout class, and is sitting at home feeling, in her own words, poor, miserable, and unhealthy. In Los Angeles, someone put in 38 cents of gas. 38 cents, because that is all they could afford. Someone else put in $10 and called it doable. These are not edge cases. These are people making calculations at the pump that were unthinkable a year ago, choosing between filling the tank and buying groceries, choosing between driving to work and staying home. And here is the suffocating part of this. Prices do not historically go back down to their historic lows after a shock like this. That is not pessimism. That is what the experts are saying. Stagflation. Continued high prices, lower growth. The pain does not pass when the conflict ends. It crystallizes. It becomes the new floor. California is not an outlier. California is a preview. When people ask why gas in California can reach $10 while the South is still at $4, the answer is a combination of state fuel regulations, the fact that California sources 70% of its fuel supplies from foreign countries, and a political environment that has systematically restricted domestic production even while sitting on millions of barrels of untapped oil with functional pipelines and refineries in place. The infrastructure exists to fuel the entire country. The decision has been made not to use it, and the rest of the country is catching up to California's prices faster than anyone publicly acknowledges. The national average is above $4. Portland is above $5. New York is at $6. Los Angeles is at $8. California is touching $10. That is not a random scatter of numbers. That is a trajectory, and it is moving in one direction.